There is a particular quality of attention that a city street rewards when you stop looking at the buildings and begin looking between them. Not at the facades, not at the ornament, not at the shop fronts or the windows or the articulated stone, but at the horizontal lines that the facades share with one another, the invisible threads that run from building to building at consistent heights, connecting structures of entirely different ages and owners and purposes into something that reads, from a distance, as a single coherent thing. Most people feel this coherence without being able to name it. They describe the street as harmonious, or unified, or well-scaled, attributing the quality to some vague agreement of style, some fortunate accident of period or material. What they are actually responding to is a datum, a shared horizontal reference, a line held in common across the width and length of the street, around which every individual building has organized itself. The datum is not drawn on the street, it is not painted on the buildings. It exists as a discipline, as an agreement, sometimes informal and sometimes legally enforced, that one dimension will be held constant so that everything else may vary freely within it. The cornice is the oldest form of this agreement. Walk the length of any Georgian terrace, any Regency crescent, any boulevard that was built in a single sustained campaign, and you will notice that the roof lines are not what a line. It is the cornice, the projecting horizontal molding that marks the transition between the facade and whatever comes above, that runs at the same height from one end of the street to the other, absorbing every variation of window rhythm and door placement and material choice beneath a single shared horizon. John Wood the Younger completed the Royal Crescent in Bath in 1774, and the crescent's authority comes almost entirely from this device. The 30 houses that compose it are not identical. They differ in their internal arrangements, in their fenestration details, in the ways their owners subsequently modified them. But the cornice runs continuously, at a fixed height, across the entire arc of the composition, and it transforms 30 separate properties into one enormous civic room. The datum is the instrument of that transformation. Without it, the crescent is a collection of houses. With it, it is a statement. What makes this discipline ancient is not its survival into the Georgian period, but its presence long before there were streets in any urban sense at all. The Parthenon, built on the Athenian Acropolis between 447 and 432 BCE, rests on a stylobate, the uppermost of the three-stepped platform courses that form the base of the temple. And this stylobate is not merely a foundation, it is a datum. It is the single horizontal surface from which every vertical element of the building rises and to which every vertical element of the building is referred. The columns begin here. The proportional system begins here. The slight upward curvature built into the stylobate, an almost imperceptible convexity, measurable in centimeters across the full width of the building, was introduced precisely because a perfectly level datum would read as sagging under the visual weight of the colonnade above. The correction is a refinement of the datum, not an abandonment of it. The Greek architects understood that the horizontal line was not a given of the physical world, but an achievement of the architectural one. Something that had to be designed and constructed with care, because it was doing more work than any other single element in the composition. The Renaissance relearned this. The Palazzo Strozzi in Florence, begun in 1489, articulates its 3 stories with continuous horizontal string courses. Shallow projecting bands of stone that run uninterrupted around the entire perimeter of the building, marking the floor-to-floor transitions with lines that are not structural but organizational. The string course is a datum. It tells the eye where one regime of the building ends and another begins. It makes the vertical surface legible. And because the string courses are shared between the building's 3 stories rather than belonging to any one of them, they create a hierarchy in which the individual windows and bays are subordinate to the larger tripartite order. The ornament is local. The datum is global. The building's authority rests on that distinction. Le Corbusier, who absorbed the history of European architecture with unusual thoroughness before announcing his rejection of most of it, codified the underlying logic in his Towards a New Architecture in 1923, under the heading of regulating lines. His argument was that the great buildings of the past, the Parthenon, the facades of Bramante, the villas of Palladio, were not beautiful by accident or by talent alone, but because their dimensions were governed by geometric traces, diagonals, orthogonals, and crucially, horizontals that established proportional relationships between all the elements the line touched. The regulating line was not the same as the datum. Le Corbusier's concept was more purely proportional, less spatially concrete, but it operated by the same discipline. It said, "This horizontal is not arbitrary. Every element that meets it or relates to it is answerable to it. The line is the law, and the beauty is the evidence of obedience to the law." Haussmann's reconstruction of Paris between 1853 and 1870 elevated this principle from a formal ideal to an administrative instrument. The new boulevards that Baron Haussmann cut through the medieval fabric of the city were lined with buildings whose cornice height was not suggested but mandated, specified in the building regulations that governed every property along the new alignments. The result was the Paris that tourists photograph, a city where the skyline is not a chaos of individual assertions, but a continuous datum, broken only where the great monuments, Notre Dame, Sacré-Cœur, the Eiffel Tower, are permitted to exceed it. The uniform cornice height does not produce identical buildings. It produces buildings whose variety is perceived against a common reference, and that common reference is what gives the variety its meaning. Without the datum, the difference between one building and the next is just noise. With it, the difference is a conversation. Manhattan arrived at its version of this understanding through a different mechanism. Not aesthetic conviction, but legal necessity. The 1916 zoning resolution, the first comprehensive zoning law in the United States, was passed in direct response to the Equitable Building of 1915, which rose 40 stories from its lot line without setback and cast a shadow over 7 acres of lower Manhattan. The resolution introduced a system of setback envelopes, diagonal planes rising from the street at prescribed angles beyond which no building could extend. And this system produced, unintentionally as a byproduct of the envelope's geometry, the stepped silhouettes of the Art Deco skyscrapers. The setback was a datum of a different kind, not a continuous line held across a street, but a shared discipline of retreat. A common rule that synchronized buildings without synchronizing their appearances. The Chrysler Building and the Empire State Building do not look alike. They are both answers to the same question. When you draw a section, the cut through a building that reveals its vertical organization, you have an opportunity that the plan does not offer so directly. The chance to establish a datum before you place a single room. A horizontal line drawn at a consistent height across the section before anything else is decided is a commitment. It says that this level will mean something, that elements at this elevation will be in dialogue with one another, that whatever happens above and below will be organized in relation to this shared reference. The datum is not decoration. It is not an afterthought. It is the first discipline, the line you draw before you know what the building will be, because without it, the building will never quite cohere. The cornice the street shares, the stylobate the columns rise from, the string course the stories are counted by. These are all the same act, performed at different scales across the full sweep of architectural history. They are the quiet